William Randolph Hearst's illicit affair with starlet Marion Davies created a tabloid frenzy, but few realized the couple was hiding an even more shocking secret. Hearst was a king-making media magnate, but his flair for sensational journalism, fierce rivalries with competing newspapers, and scandalous personal life nearly depleted the family fortune. He was such a controversial figure that he famously inspired one of cinema's most memorable villains. Born in April 1863, Hearst was the son of millionaire mining magnate George Hearst and his wife Phoebe Apperson. Thanks to his father's wealth, Hearst attended the finest schools before moving on to Harvard. There he joined a fraternity and several elite clubs, but his academic career didn't last long. Before he could graduate, Harvard expelled him, and it wasn't hard to see why. Rather than studying, Hearst gained notoriety as a party-loving prankster. He hosted wild parties in Harvard Square and mailed pudding pots filled with waste to his professors. After his expulsion, he took over management of the San Francisco Examiner, his father's newspaper, and began building a media empire of his own. Hearst understood that the secret to any newspaper's success lay in its writing, so he hired the best. He recruited literary heavyweights like Mark Twain and Jack London, along with famed political cartoonist Homer Davenport, among others. With his powerhouse team assembled, Hearst rebranded his father's paper and gave it a bold new motto: Monarch of the Dailies. Star writers or not, he certainly wasn't shy about expressing his opinions in print. Breaking with journalistic tradition, Hearst used his platform to openly share his populist views. He regularly exposed corruption in local government and wasn't afraid to criticize his own class of wealthy elites. No one, not even his own family, was safe. He routinely targeted companies in which his family had invested. His unapologetic bluntness clearly paid off. Before long, Hearst had become the dominant force in San Francisco journalism, but his ambitions stretched far beyond the Bay Area. Even in the early days of running the Examiner, Hearst had his eye on a much bigger prize: New York City. With financial backing from his mother, Hearst purchased the struggling New York Morning Journal in 1895 and promptly turned the city's newspaper scene on its head. He poached top talent from rival publications with one target in particular: Joseph Pulitzer's New York World. What followed was a knockdown, drag-out newspaper war like nothing the world had ever seen. To attract top-tier writers and crush his competition, he was an unfailingly polite boss, willing to indulge prima donnas, eccentrics, bohemians, and drinkers as long as they could write. And it didn't hurt that he paid better than anyone else. Working at a Hearst-owned newspaper was by all accounts a wild ride. He assembled a legendary staff of literary giants and kept them entertained with lavish parties and all manner of office antics. Some even claimed the newsroom soirees featured dancing girls. But when it came to business, Hearst didn't mess around. He didn't just want to report the news, he wanted to be the news. Under the bold motto, "While others talk, the journal acts," he pioneered a brand of crusading journalism that often blurred the line between reporting and activism. If there was a scandal, corruption, or injustice, Hearst wasn't above sensationalizing it and cashing in on the public outrage. But that brash new approach was only the beginning. Hearst and his chief rival, Joseph Pulitzer, waged an all-out newspaper war. But rather than destroying the news industry, they reinvented it. Their respective papers competed to outdo one another with lurid headlines, high-stakes exposés, provocative cartoons, and over-the-top human drama. Critics slammed Hearst for turning the press into a circus, but they may have underestimated him. Despite the spectacle, the journal was demanding of its writers and sophisticated by contemporary standards. In short, Hearst's papers may have scandalized, but they still made sense. After his father's death, Hearst inherited a sizable fortune, but no amount of money could keep pace with his spending. When a concerned friend warned Phoebe Hearst that her son was burning through $1 million a year, she reportedly shrugged and said, "Too bad. Then he'll only last 30 years. Fortunately for Hearst, and unfortunately for his rivals, he really did have money to burn. By 1898, his newspaper war with Joseph Pulitzer had become a black hole for cash. Both men poured millions into covering the Spanish-American War, and neither saw an immediate return. But when the dust settled and the actual cannons stopped firing, Hearst and Pulitzer begrudgingly called a truce. Only then did the journal finally start turning a profit, and it was clear Hearst had come out on top. After just 1 year in New York, Hearst had already cemented his place as the undisputed king of the city's newspaper game. Following the 1896 election, the journal boasted a circulation of over 1 million copies, with some editions even topping 1.5 million copies sold. It was a publishing feat he proudly declared unparalleled in the history of the world. But he didn't always use that influence for good. Hearst hadn't just reported on the Spanish-American War. He arguably helped ignite it. When the USS Maine exploded in Havana Harbor, the journal whipped public outrage into a frenzy. So much so that critics began referring to the conflict as the Journal's War. And Hearst didn't seem to mind the label. He wasn't merely printing the news. He had become the news. Having conquered the news business, Hearst set his sights on something bigger, politics. But he knew that if he wanted to win a national election, he needed national coverage. So he did what any media-savvy mogul would do. He bought more newspapers. By the mid-1920s, Hearst's name wasn't on a few masked heads. It was on nearly 30 of them. From the Los Angeles Examiner to the Boston American, his empire spanned the entire country, and it didn't stop at newspapers. He also controlled a fleet of magazines, including Cosmopolitan, Good Housekeeping, and Harper's Bazaar. In short, Hearst's empire really was made of paper. For a brief moment, though, he swapped headlines for handshakes. With the not-so-subtle boost of favorable coverage in his own papers, Hearst won 2 terms in Congress, representing New York in the early 1900s. But his political ambitions didn't stop there. The secret to Hearst's success was also one of the most controversial things about him. He championed the underdog. Hearst might have been the millionaire media mogul's son of a millionaire mining tycoon, but he positioned himself as a man of the people. Aligning to the left wing of the progressive movement, he championed the working class, his newspaper's core readership. But preaching against the rich and powerful, while being rich and powerful, proved a tough sell. Backed by left-wing populists, Hearst launched a bid for the Democratic presidential nomination in 1904. But he quickly learned that newspaper readers didn't always translate into reliable voters. He lost the nomination and went on to lose 3 more elections, 2 for mayor of New York and 1 for governor. Eventually, even his own papers couldn't help but poke fun. After failing in every election after his time in Congress, Hearst picked up a scathing nickname. William also, Randolph Hearst, the clever insult coined by humorist Wallace Irwin, stuck and stung like permanent ink on newsprint. Still, Hearst didn't need to hold office to wield power. Despite his string of humiliating defeats, Hearst never stopped using his vast media network to push his views. He fiercely opposed U.S. entry into World War I, condemned the League of Nations, and even ordered his newspapers to endorse no candidate in the 1920 and 1924 elections. But he wasn't quite done with politics just yet. Until now, Hearst had known only growth and success, but that was about to change. The Roaring Twenties were good to Hearst, until they weren't. His empire reached its peak just before the Great Depression, and then it began to crumble. In his aggressive pursuit to acquire as many newspapers as possible, Hearst had stretched himself dangerously thin. His publications rarely paid for themselves, and when his inherited mining and ranching investments faltered, the rest of the empire followed suit. Hearst's last real shot at political power came in 1922 when he made a play for the U.S. Senate nomination in New York. But by then, he'd made a powerful enemy, Governor Al Smith. Smith crushed Hearst's bid and became Hearst's enemy in the process. In hindsight, Smith may have saved New York from something far worse. To the shock of his critics and many of his readers, Hearst later voiced sympathy for the rise of the Third Reich. Historian Rawdon Carlyle noted that while Hearst officially disavowed the worst excesses of the regime, his newspapers still eagerly ran Hitler's talking points. In fact, Hearst's relationship with the Führer got a little too cozy for comfort. In 1934, Hearst made headlines once again when he traveled to Berlin to meet the infamous dictator face to face. During their conversation, the Führer reportedly asked why the American press disliked him so much. Hearst's reply? Because Americans believe in democracy and are averse to dictatorship. Unless, of course, that dictatorship was in his own newsroom. While he preached democracy abroad, Hearst ruled his media empire with an iron fist. He ordered his foreign correspondents to file pro-German stories, or else. When some reporters refused to compromise their ethics, Hearst simply fired them. Hearst's personal reputation wasn't much better than the headlines he'd been printing. At 40, Hearst finally gave up the bachelor lifestyle, at least on paper. He married 21-year-old chorus girl Millicent Veronica Wilson in a ceremony befitting a media mogul. Together they had 5 sons, and from the outside looked like the perfect American family. But behind closed doors, Hearst had other plans and other partners. By the mid-1920s, Millicent had had enough. After years of enduring Hearst's increasingly public affair with actress Marion Davies, she packed her bags. Though the two never officially divorced, they remained married until Hearst's death decades later. The arrangement may have scandalized his reputation, but Hearst did not seem to mind that at all. When he wasn't running a media empire, Hearst was playing sugar daddy to one of Hollywood's brightest starlets. He had taken up with Marion Davies, a comedic actress, nearly 30 years his junior, and the pair openly lived as a couple from 1919 onward. Political office may have slipped through his fingers, but he still got to choose his leading lady and bankroll her every dream. While Millicent stayed behind in a New York apartment, Hearst and Davies lived lavishly on the West Coast. But even their palatial mansion wasn't enough. After spotting St. Donat's Castle in a magazine, Hearst purchased the historic Welsh estate, furnished it with priceless artifacts, and let Davies host extravagant parties for guests, like Winston Churchill and Charlie Chaplin. But their most lavish secret wasn't on display. For decades, Hearst and Davies paraded a young woman named Patricia Lake as Davies's niece. But after Lake's passing in 1993, family insiders revealed the truth. She was actually the secret daughter of Hearst and Davies, a child hidden in plain sight, born into a world of wealth and whispers. And with so many children, public and otherwise, Hearst needed space. He began building a fantasy estate in California in 1919, the now iconic Hearst Castle in San Simeon, filled with imported art, rare artifacts, and even Arabian horses. It was the ultimate monument to Hearst's ambition, ego, and love of opulence. Tragically, Hearst never lived to see his California castle completed. Between the castles, the art collections, and the sprawling newspapers, Hearst finally hid his financial limit in the 1930s. By 1937, Hearst had become something he never imagined: broke. What came next was downright embarrassing. As his fortune slipped through his fingers, Hearst had an unexpected chance to save part of his crumbling empire. His friend, Joseph P. Kennedy, offered to buy his struggling magazines, but Hearst, too proud and possessive, refused. Instead, he mortgaged his beloved San Simeon estate for a cool $600,000. Sadly, it wasn't nearly enough for exclusive perks like early access to new videos, priority replies to your comments, and to have your say on future content, consider becoming a Factornate member. On top of that, your support helps keep the channel going. Click the link in the description for more details. By the late 1930s, Hearst's finances were spiraling out of control. Tens of millions in debt. He laid off most of his staff, sold off his exotic animals, and handed over the control of his finances to a trustee. No matter how far he had fallen, Hearst refused to sell his newspapers, not even to save himself from ruin. Instead, he accepted a humiliating lifeline from his mistress, Marion Davies, who pawned her jewelry and used her connections to raise $2 million. Even worse, Hearst had to pay rent to live in his own castle. Though his empire had crumbled during the Depression, Hearst staged a legendary comeback. As America mobilized for World War II, advertising revenues surged, and the Hearst Corporation bounced back. Hearst, who had been holed up at his other estate when Toon triumphantly returned to San Simeon in 1945. He even resumed his philanthropic efforts, donating art to museums in an attempt to restore his public image, if only briefly. As Hearst's empire rebounded, his health declined, and the remote location of San Simeon became a problem. In 1947, he left his cherished estate to seek medical care in Beverly Hills. Sadly, that would be his final move. On August 14, 1951, William Randolph Hearst died at the age of 88. His legacy, however, would live on in infamy. Years before his death, Hearst caught a glimpse of how history might remember him when he learned about Orson Welles' 1941 masterpiece, Citizen Kane. Though fictional, many recognized it as a thinly veiled takedown of the media magnate. Hearst never saw Citizen Kane, but he hated it all the same. Using the restored power of his media empire, he tried to crush the film before it ever reached theaters. While Welles and Arquillo resisted, Hearst's Hollywood allies pressured theaters to blacklist the movie, and to some extent, it worked. Citizen Kane underperformed at the box office initially, but it became a classic in the decades that followed, forever cementing Hearst's legacy as a ruthless and controversial media mogul. If you enjoyed this Factinate video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more incredible stories. Want to see who we cover next? Join our membership program through the link in the description for exclusive perks. Your support means everything to us. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.